They thought they'd mapped out my future. Blueprints, schedules, semester plans. I was supposed to follow them all. But every time I opened a textbook, another part of me went quiet. They said I had everything: grades, potential, discipline. But no one asked if I had desire. No one saw me disappearing. They thought I dropped out because I couldn't handle it, that I gave up, that I threw away a golden ticket. But they never understood. I wasn't rejecting success. I was rejecting their version of it. It wasn't failure. It was a beginning dressed in silence. And soon, it would speak loudly. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. This is the story of how I left everything they wanted for me and found something I never knew I could build. When I was 10, my dad gave me a TI-84 calculator for Christmas. I remember staring at it, confused. My cousins got dolls. My brother got a bike. I got math. Engineers build the future, Dad said, grinning. And one day you'll build things too. Bigger things. Better. I nodded. Because I always nodded. That's what good daughters did. Especially daughters like me. Quiet, obedient, the firstborn. My mom, Evelyn, was the calm but firm type. She believed in achievement, discipline, and doing what made sense. Feelings? Optional. Logic? Non-negotiable. She'd say things like, "Passion is a luxury, Alyssa. Stability is the goal." They had my life mapped out before I even understood what college meant. Advanced math in high school, summer programs for STEM, engineering clubs, coding boot camps. Every step was a staircase. Every choice calculated. And for a while, I didn't question it. I got straight A's. I smiled when adults called me a little genius. I even learned to enjoy the validation, even if I didn't love the work. But there were cracks in the path early on. I would write poetry in the margins of my physics notebook. I'd find myself sketching faces in the corner of blueprints. And late at night, I'd search how to become a writer when no one was watching. I remember one time in junior year, we had a group project building a bridge model out of spaghetti and glue. Everyone else focused on stress limits and load calculations. Me? I was obsessed with how it looked. I wanted it to be beautiful. Trevor, one of the boys in my group, laughed and said, "You know this isn't art school, right?" That stung more than it should have. But I shrugged it off. Because that's what I was taught. Swallow, smile, keep moving. I had an acceptance letter to Stanford Engineering by senior year. My parents framed it. They threw a small dinner party. My dad toasted to the future Dr. Monroe. Even though engineering didn't require a PhD, he liked the sound of it. I felt like a guest at my own celebration. By the time I got to Stanford, the reality of it all started to sink in. It wasn't just hard, it was hollow. The lectures were dense. The labs were endless. The problem sets relentless. But more than that, it felt like I was being sculpted into someone else. I envied the art majors walking barefoot across the quad, paint on their clothes, late to class because they were in flow. I couldn't remember the last time I felt in flow. Or even alive. Still, I pushed through. Because that's what everyone expected. That's what being the first in your family to go to an Ivy-like school meant. It wasn't about joy. It was about survival. But my mind, it began to rebel. I stopped sleeping. Started skipping meals. I had anxiety attacks during lab exams and blacked out once in a heat wave outside the robotics building. I didn't tell my parents. When I called home, I'd say things like, "Yeah, everything's good. Busy but good." Mom would ask, "How's the GPA?" Dad would say, "Just remember, graduation is only the beginning." And I'd nod, smile, pretend. But I was unraveling. Sophomore year, during winter break, I wrote a short story about a girl who lived her parents' dreams and disappeared into them. I cried the whole time I wrote it. I posted it anonymously on a blog and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I got an email. "I don't know who you are, but this story saved me. Thank you." That broke me. Because for the first time I realized I had a voice. And someone heard it. It wasn't a class grade. It wasn't a scholarship. It wasn't a line on a resume. It was real. When I returned to school, everything felt different. Colder, heavier, less mine. I tried to finish the semester, but something inside me refused. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't weakness. It was truth. I withdrew from Stanford the week before spring finals. I packed my dorm in silence. Told my roommate I was taking a break. She looked confused, then sad. When I got home to Austin, my parents were waiting in the kitchen. Mom was holding a mug of coffee, her lips tight. Dad leaned against the counter like he was preparing for impact. I couldn't speak, so I handed them the withdrawal form. My mother blinked. My father didn't say a word for several minutes. Then he finally asked, "Is this a joke?" I shook my head. He turned away. Mom muttered,
"We don't talk about this. Not now."
"Not ever." That night, I heard her whispering on the phone to my aunt. "She's just taking a break. She'll go back. She has to." No one asked me how I felt. They only asked when I'd fix it. Friends stopped calling. Relatives stopped visiting. My name became a quiet absence at family events. I started working part-time at a bookstore downtown. It didn't pay much, but I liked being around stories. Every morning, I'd walk past the engineering firm where I'd interned just the summer before. No one recognized me anymore. And I didn't recognize myself. One afternoon, my cousin Megan visited from Chicago. She was a rising lawyer, freshly hired by a top firm. At dinner, she leaned over and asked, "So what's next, Alyssa? Going back to school soon?" I smiled.
"No."
"Not right now." She raised an eyebrow and said,
"Oh,
"You're still figuring it out." That phrase, "still figuring it out," like I was broken, delayed, malfunctioning. I nodded, because there was no point arguing. They'd already rewritten my story before I had a chance to live it. But somewhere between those quiet bookstore mornings and anonymous blog replies, I began again. No one saw it. No one celebrated it. But I had started over. And no one noticed. The bookstore was small, tucked between a juice bar and a dry cleaner on South Congress Avenue. Most days, it was quiet. Occasionally, it smelled like oranges when the juice bar's air drifted through the vents. We had a cat named Hemingway who ignored customers but curled up beside me when I stocked shelves. I didn't say much. I alphabetized, cleaned the counters, learned which regulars liked mystery novels and which ones only read poetry. I made just enough to cover gas, coffee, and the old Chromebook I bought secondhand off Facebook Marketplace. One Tuesday afternoon, a woman in her 70s walked in. She wore a green scarf, floral earrings, and walked like every step asked for permission. She held up a Kindle and sighed. "This machine hates me," she muttered. I smiled gently. "May I?" I didn't know much, but I'd tinkered with tech long enough to know how to reset a frozen e-reader. She watched me, eyes wide, as I showed her how to download books from the library app. Her name was Lorraine. She used to be a public school teacher, retired now, and terrified of anything with a touchscreen. We started talking every week. Sometimes she'd bring other seniors along, friends from her walking group or neighbors who couldn't figure out Gmail. Soon, we were gathering every Thursday in the back of the bookstore. They called it Tech and Tea, even though the tea was always lukewarm and the tech barely worked.
I didn't advertise it.
I didn't plan to. It was just something that grew from need. One day, Lorraine stayed after the others had left. She had tears in her eyes. "I know this sounds silly," she said, "but today you brought my baby into my living room." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "My grandson lives in Oregon," she explained. "He's 2. And today I saw his face move. Heard him say, 'Nana.' It felt like a miracle." She squeezed my hand. That night, I cried in the break room. Not out of sadness, but something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. From that day on, I started spending more time researching how to simplify tech for older adults. I'd stay up until 2 a.m. watching YouTube tutorials on interface design, accessibility, and low-tech onboarding strategies. I started writing beginner guides, like how to set up Zoom, how to spot phishing emails, how to use voice dictation. I printed them out in large font, folded them into little booklets, and gave them away for free. At first, only Lorraine used them. Then Barbara. Then Mr. Donnelly. Soon, the Thursday group had over 20 members. We had to move to the community center 2 blocks down. I didn't have a business license, a formal plan, or even a website. But I had people. And I had trust. I called the project Silvernet. The name came to me while shelving a fantasy novel, something about magic and age, and invisible threads of connection. I built a basic website using a free WordPress template. It had 3 pages. 1. Who we are, just a photo of our group holding mismatched mugs. 2. What we do, a list of skills we taught. 3. Join us, a contact form that barely worked. Still, emails trickled in. A librarian from San Antonio, a retirement home manager from Denver, a nurse in Atlanta who asked if she could use my guides for her patients. It was all informal. No fees. No pressure. But something inside me clicked into place. I began designing better materials, adding illustrations, writing in plain English, even color-coding steps. I used Canva, Google Docs, and whatever free tools I could find. I didn't think of it as a business. It felt more like stitching something back together, something the world had dropped. I started doing one-on-one calls with seniors in different states. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they cursed at their routers. Sometimes they laughed so hard they couldn't breathe. Once, a 93-year-old man named Hank accidentally joined a dating site and called me in a panic. "Miss Monroe, I think I just proposed to a woman in Tampa." We fixed it. He ended up sending her a real letter instead. I started documenting these stories. Not for profit. Just for memory. I wrote blog posts like, "How to explain Wi-Fi to your grandfather without losing your mind." Teaching my aunt to use Uber in 6 emotional stages. When a 78-year-old sends her first GIF, a love story. And somehow people read them. They shared them. One night, I got an email from a woman named Jamie Fletcher. She worked for a mid-sized nonprofit that focused on aging and digital inclusion. Her email read, "I stumbled onto your blog while researching digital literacy. It made me cry and laugh. Would you ever consider training our volunteers?" I said yes before I even knew what that would mean. By the end of that month, I'd held 2 virtual workshops. The turnout wasn't massive, just 15 to 20 people, but they were engaged. They asked questions, took notes, offered to translate my guides into Spanish and Korean. I started seeing the bigger picture. This wasn't just a side project. It was a need, a blind spot in a tech-obsessed world. So I started mapping things out, how to scale, how to train others, how to build a curriculum. I built a course, Digital Basics for Seniors, taught by humans, not robots. I filmed the videos in my bedroom, with books stacked behind the webcam and a borrowed mic from a friend who used to podcast. I offered the course for free to my first 100 users. By the end of the week, 86 had signed up. Most were from Texas, a few from Florida. One woman joined from Belize. Her name was Miriam, and she messaged me, "Thank you." I didn't think anyone remembered women like me still wanted to learn. I printed that message and taped it above my desk. I wasn't making money. I wasn't being celebrated. But I was waking up with joy. And for the first time since I left Stanford, I didn't feel small. My parents still didn't ask questions. My mom would occasionally say things like, "You're still doing that internet thing, right?" And I'd say yes. Because trying to explain meaning to someone who only understands measurement, that's a losing battle. So I stopped fighting. I just kept building. And slowly, quietly, Silvernet grew. It didn't make headlines. But it mattered. By the end of that year, Silvernet wasn't just a local curiosity. It was becoming something real. I registered the name as a nonprofit. Filed the paperwork myself, nervously triple-checking the EIN form with YouTube tutorials and legal templates. Then I applied for a grant from a regional tech equity initiative. To my surprise, I got it. $15,000. Not life-changing, but enough to buy decent equipment, build a proper website, and pay a developer friend, Derek, to help automate course signups. We added a chat assistant, streamlined user onboarding, launched a newsletter. By spring, we were onboarding around 1,200 seniors per month. The free course had over 8,000 users. Our email open rate? 78%. Higher than some Fortune 500 companies. I started tracking our impact. 67% of users reported they used telehealth for the first time after completing our training. 42% reconnected with distant family via video calls. 88% felt more confident using technology daily. But the best metrics were invisible. Like when Nancy, 82, sent a photo of herself grinning with a birthday cake she ordered online, first time ever. Or Eugene, a retired postman who said, "My granddaughter sends me TikToks now. And I send her back memes." I didn't know this was possible. I began getting speaking invites from small panels to digital aging forums. I said yes to most. Not because I loved the spotlight, but because I believed in the work. I remember sitting backstage at a conference in Phoenix. The speaker before me was a CEO of a tech startup with $80 million in funding. He wore Allbirds, had a team of 30, presented with slides and confidence. Then it was my turn. I walked on stage with a secondhand laptop, a thrift store blouse, and a trembling voice. But I told them about Lorraine, about Hank, about Miriam and Belize. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Afterwards, one woman from the audience came up and said, "You're doing sacred work. Just thought you should hear that." I drove back to my hotel and cried in the parking lot, not because I was sad, but because someone finally used the word sacred. Not cute, not noble, not interesting.
Sacred.
Still, back home, it was silence. My dad once asked, while replacing the kitchen faucet, "How's that senior citizen thing going? You finding a job yet?" I stood there, stunned. I wanted to tell him we just partnered with a national organization to roll out guides to 600 libraries. I wanted to say our waitlist was over 1,000 seniors long, that we were featured in a public service podcast. But all I said was, "Yeah, it's going all right." He nodded like I'd said nothing at all. My mom didn't ask. She only mentioned things in passing. "Your cousin Julia just got a raise. She's now a systems engineer in DC. I'd smile. Say, "That's great." Because I wasn't in the competition anymore. They had ridden me out of it years ago. At a family barbecue, my Uncle Robert joked, "So you teach old folks to click buttons? Real noble work." He laughed. Everyone else laughed. Even my cousin Megan, the lawyer from Chicago, snorted into her wine. I smiled politely, swallowed the heat in my throat. I wanted to tell them that one of those old folks just helped her local community center digitize 300 records, that another now volunteers remotely as a literacy tutor. But what's the point of speaking when no one's really listening? Still, the work kept moving. Derek helped me redesign the platform to support tiered courses, beginner, intermediate, and one we named Digital Confidence. We began working with translators to offer versions in Spanish, Tagalog, and Hindi. I hired my first team member, Grace, a former librarian with a gentle voice and a heart for people. She handled user support like it was a ministry. We launched a partnership with a senior housing group in the Midwest. They printed our guides, held weekly viewings of the tutorials, and even hosted a graduation ceremony for the residents who completed all 3 modules. One woman named Alberta, age 90, made a speech. "I may be old, but I ain't obsolete." That line went viral on Instagram. I sat in my apartment, watching the video hit 30,000 views, eating leftover ramen in socks that didn't match. Still, my phone was silent. No calls from Mom. No message from Dad. No text that said, "We're proud of you." Sometimes I wondered if they ever searched my name, if they ever read the testimonials, if they even knew what Silvernet really was. I imagine them scrolling past my blog posts without realizing they were mine, or hearing about our program on the radio and switching the station. When people asked me about my family, I just said, "We're different kinds of people." Because explaining emotional distance is like describing color to someone who's never seen light. But despite the void, I kept going. I began mentoring others who wanted to replicate Silvernet in their communities. We started a small grant fund, helped a woman in North Carolina open a digital skills club in her church basement, supported a veteran in Seattle who began teaching tech at his local VFW hall. We weren't a tech company. We were a human company disguised in digital clothes. And slowly, we were building something sturdy. People would ask, "Are you a startup? A nonprofit? An ed tech company?" I'd answer, "We're just a bridge between people and possibility." By year 3, we had over 21,000 registered users, 70-plus community partners, and a digital toolkit translated into 8 languages. We even got a modest feature in a national publication. The article read, "Meet the 28-year-old Texan quietly closing the digital divide." When it came out, I emailed the link to my parents. No response. Not even a seen notification.
So I stopped trying.
I stopped emailing, stopped updating them, stopped hoping. And in that space, I found peace. Because recognition didn't always come from blood. Sometimes it came from a stranger's typed sentence. From the voice of a woman who learned to FaceTime her granddaughter. From an elderly man who cried after sending his first email. I was no longer chasing applause. I was just doing the work. And while my name wasn't in lights, it was whispered, quietly, in homes and hearts I'd never step into. And that was enough. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I had just wrapped up a client pitch via Zoom and was sipping coffee at my favorite spot. A local cafe in East Austin where startup folks, artists, and freelancers hovered in collective chaos. I was dressed casually, jeans, a code like a girl, tee, and my laptop covered in stickers like Dropout, Level, CEO. Nothing flashy. Nothing to announce who I was. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me," a man's voice said. I turned to see a tall, clean-cut guy in his early 40s. Blazer over a t-shirt.
Techie vibe.
"Sorry to bother you," he said, "but are you Alyssa Monroe?" I hesitated. "Yeah, I am." His eyes lit up. "I thought so. I saw your TEDx talk last month. The power of saying no to the wrong dream. It was incredible." I blinked. I wasn't used to strangers recognizing me.
Wow.
"Thank you." He chuckled. "No, seriously. That line about how silence isn't surrender, it's a strategy, hit me hard. I've been in engineering for 18 years, and I think I've been ignoring that whisper myself." I smiled, still a bit stunned. "I'm Jason, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "I work over at Zephyr Tech. We're a mid-size innovation firm. AI meets sustainability. I head up development there." He paused, then added, "Look, I know this is random, but would you ever be open to consulting for us? We're having an internal identity crisis. Our devs are brilliant, but they lack heart. Your approach, that soul-centered startup model, it's what we're missing." I stared at him for a second, coffee forgotten in my hand. A tech firm wanted me, the dropout, the disappointment, the failure, to help them rediscover their purpose? He must have seen the hesitation in my face. "I know you're busy," he said quickly, "but if you're open, I'll send details. No pressure." "Send it," I replied. "I'm listening." That moment was surreal, not because he recognized me, but because he saw me. Not the GPA. Not the dropout label. Not the empty chair I left behind in some university lab. He saw the woman I had become, and he respected her mind. That night, I called Mom. I didn't bring up engineering or the old dreams. I just told her someone stopped me today to say thank you. And for the first time in years, she didn't ask me if I'd thought about going back to school. She just said, "I'm proud of you, sweetie." 3 months later, I was invited to keynote a national entrepreneurship summit in Chicago. Theme: The Future of Innovation, led by the unconventional. I stood backstage, listening to the speaker before me, a Yale alum, venture-backed founder of a fintech startup. The kind of success story my parents would have drooled over. And yet, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel behind. When they called my name, Alyssa Monroe, founder of Clarity Forge, I walked on stage wearing black jeans, sneakers, and a confident smile. The lights were bright. The audience was packed. and in the front row, I saw him. Professor Alan Whitaker, my former thermodynamics professor. The man who once told me, some of us are born for this path, Alyssa, and some just aren't wired for the rigor. I had walked out of his class in the middle of his rant, and now he was here, front row, watching me speak. I clicked the remote. The first slide lit up behind me. When you don't fit the mold, melt it down and build your own. The room chuckled. I launched into my talk. I told them about leaving engineering. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I wouldn't betray myself to belong. I spoke about the long, silent months building Clarity Forge, my startup that helped burn-out tech professionals pivot into soulful, purpose-led ventures. I shared our stats, over 120 clients in 2 years, $2 million in revenue, 0 VC funding. And then I said something I hadn't said aloud before. The best decision I ever made wasn't dropping out. It was choosing not to be miserable, just to make other people comfortable. That line landed like a wave. The crowd was quiet, then burst into applause. After the speech, people lined up to talk. Photos.
Cards.
Questions. But the person I didn't expect to see was Professor Whitaker. He walked up slowly, hands clasped. Alyssa, he said. That was remarkable. I nodded politely. Thank you. He paused, awkward. Then added, I owe you an apology. Back then, I was too rigid to see outside the metrics. You didn't fail engineering. You outgrew it. I looked him in the eye. I didn't need your approval then, but I'll accept your honesty now. He gave a tight smile. Fair enough. As he walked away, I felt it, not just pride, but peace. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that leaving their version of success wasn't a detour. It was the main road all along. Later that week, I flew home to visit my parents in Dallas. I hadn't seen them since my Chicago talk went viral. Over 2.4 million views in 4 days. LinkedIn flooded. Emails from women in tech, dropout students, even senior engineers, thanking me for saying what no one else would. Mom met me at the door with a long, quiet hug. No speeches. No, I told her. Just warmth I hadn't felt in years. That night over dinner, Dad finally spoke. I watched the video, he said, barely lifting his eyes from his plate.
Twice.
I sipped my tea, waiting. He continued. I always thought success meant doing what lasts.
Degrees. Jobs.
Retirement plans. He exhaled, glancing up. But you did something I never had the guts to do. You left something stable to build something honest. Silence settled. Then he said it. I'm proud of you, Alyssa. My breath caught. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear those words until I did. We cleaned up the table together, him drying dishes while I rinsed. Then he handed me a folded piece of paper. It's your old notebook, he said. I found it after you left for Austin. I opened it. Inside were my earliest sketches for a creative agency, back when I was 16. Logos. Mind maps. Dream clients. I'd hidden them under my bed, afraid my parents would laugh. He pointed to one sketch, a name I scribbled years ago. Clarity.
Bold.
Soulful. He said softly. Looks like you always knew. We were just late catching up. My mom joined us, placing a hand on my shoulder. We didn't understand it then, she said, but we see it now. That moment, no camera, no applause, no likes, was louder than Chicago. This was the real victory. I didn't need their permission to change my life. But hearing their understanding, it closed a chapter I'd been carrying open for too long. Today, I run a digital branding agency called SoulScript Studios, based out of Austin. We help conscious entrepreneurs, mostly women, tell their stories, scale their impact, and stop hiding behind beige, boring brands. We've crossed 7 figures in revenue. But more importantly, I wake up every morning with this steady thrum in my chest, the feeling of alignment. No more forcing. No more pretending. Just flow. My clients aren't just customers. They're rebels like me. Mothers starting over. College dropouts creating empires. Artists turning pain into platforms. They don't ask for permission to be who they are. They just need space to rise. and I get to build that space. Sometimes, when I pass a university campus or scroll past some engineering breakthrough, I smile. Not because I regret leaving, but because I understand now. Engineering wasn't the wrong path. It just wasn't mine. Every skill I learned, problem solving, pattern mapping, systems thinking, I use it all just differently. Creatively. Authentically. The world still thinks in checklists. Go to school.
Get a job.
Retire with a pension. But I think life's better when you build your own syllabus. To anyone listening, if you feel like you're trapped in a version of success that shrinks you, don't wait for applause. Don't wait for their blessing. Create the thing that keeps you up at night. Because when you stop betraying yourself for comfort, you'll find a kind of wealth that no paycheck can match. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was dropping out. Now I know. The real tragedy would have been staying in a life that wasn't mine. They forced me into engineering because they thought it was safe, prestigious, practical. But what's the point of a safe life if it slowly erodes your spirit? What they didn't expect was that I'd drop out, build a brand from my dorm, and become a millionaire before 30, doing work that lights up every corner of my soul. I didn't just walk away from engineering. I engineered a new path. And no, there were no formulas, no guarantees, just a quiet voice inside that kept whispering, "You were made for more." To anyone out there feeling stuck in a version of life that feels like a costume, this is your sign. You don't have to shrink to fit. You don't have to explain your dreams to people who never had the courage to chase theirs. Start messy. Start scared. But start as yourself. Because the truth is, the degree, the job, the title, none of it will matter if you're too numb to feel alive. So go ahead. Redraw the blueprint. Take the leap your future self is already cheering for. Because sometimes, the smartest thing you can do is drop out of their expectations and finally step into your own brilliance. They forced me into engineering. I dropped out and became a millionaire on my own terms.